Welcome to Reality Plus, from the Matrix to the Metaverse. I am Jessica van der Schalk. I work at a think tank here in Amsterdam, and today I will moderate this program on the Metaverse, an ever-expanding world within virtual reality that has inspired many science fiction writers whose movies and stories have influenced how we think about this new world and whether it's a blessing or a curse. I would like to congratulate Brainwash for bringing on David Chalmers. He is one of the most important and famous philosophers of our time. He has changed the discourse on consciousness, not only for philosophers, but for many other sciences as well, of course, especially neuroscience. Anyone who wants to make a serious scientific claim today on the nature of consciousness has to deal with David Chalmers' hard problem, in which he demonstrates the fundamental limits of scientific research on exploring and explaining consciousness. In his latest work, Reality Plus, Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy, he combines his earlier work on consciousness with a deep reflection on the metaverse. What will it bring to our lives? What should we make of the reality we encounter there? And how should we understand the difference between the physical world and the virtual world? Many other questions are addressed in his wonderful book. And I'm sure that many people in the audience, also online, very warm welcome, who are familiar even a little bit with David's work, will be overwhelmed with questions like me. So together with the Brainwash team and our other guest, Miriam Rasch, we had to make some tough decisions about this afternoon. Miriam is a philosopher who focuses on ethical questions surrounding technology. And she has made some very sharp and important contributions on our reflection of what it means to use technology. One of my favorite parts of her work, is on the role of friction in our lives. It's a very important role friction has. It helps us develop, it stimulates. And on the other hand, with technology, we try to limit or even erase systematically friction from our lives. When I think or imagine a life in the metaverse, I get a feel of discomfort. And at the same time, I want to be freed of this discomfort. I want to be truly open to explore the possibilities and the risks that it brings. But every time I contemplate on my own discomfort, I get lost. Is it due to my attachment to some beautiful stories on the physical life, who we are, what it means for the physical life to exist? Or is it truly unsettling to exchange our physical world with a virtual world? And I'm very grateful for Miriam to be here today to guide us on this matter. I will start out with, what? Yay! You will have the answers. We will start today with first asking David to introduce his thoughts on the metaverse and how it connects to his earlier work on consciousness. Then we will bring in Miriam and ask her to reflect with us on our individual autonomy within the metaverse. It's a very important value, and you will help us reflect on that together with David. And at the final part, we will look at the value the metaverse potentially has for humankind. David, we see you. Thank you so much for being here. Can I have a warm welcome for David Chalmers?
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, Jessica, with you and Miriam at the famous Brainwash Festival. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm looking forward to our conversation.
If you were here, you would have seen that there was a line outside this door, and I think we had to dismiss like 50 people, say, sorry, you can't get in. So it's, your work is very interesting to us here in Amsterdam. My first question to you is, in fact, can you please tell us what the connection is between your earlier work on consciousness and your deep reflection on the metaverse?
I guess I would say very much of philosophy is about the mind, the world, and the relationship between them. We think about consciousness, we think about reality, and we think about how consciousness interprets or constructs or communicates reality. And for much of my work, for much of my career, I've focused on the mind side of that equation. What is the nature of the mind, the human mind? But one central part of that is also thinking about artificial minds. Thinking about an artificial mind can actually, the kinds of systems that AI is developing, could it eventually produce a genuine mind or a genuine consciousness? That's a way to actually shed some light on consciousness in general. And I think, so more recently I've started focusing on the reality side of that equation with a special focus on artificial realities, because I think for very much the same reason. Thinking about artificial realities, the virtual realities we're now building, the metaverse raises many of the same questions. Is it actually going to be a genuine reality, or will it merely be a second-class reality? By thinking about those questions, I think you can both potentially shed some light on the technology, but also shed some light on traditional philosophical questions. So I call this general project Techno-philosophy, because it's both thinking philosophically about technology, the technologies we're now dealing with, like AI and the metaverse, and using those things to actually shed light on some quite traditional philosophical issues about the nature of reality and our knowledge of the external world.
Thank you so much for that great answer. Can you explain what is the metaverse? For some people, maybe I don't even understand it myself. What is the metaverse?
So the metaverse actually was introduced by the science fiction writer Neil Stephenson in his novel Snow Crash from 1992. And in Snow Crash, the metaverse was basically a very large and wide-ranging virtual world, a virtual world in which people spent their time. They would socialize, they would be employed potentially, they would build communities, they would have relationships. So it was basically a social virtual world of a kind which is continuous in many ways with physical reality. And since Snow Crash, many people, including the tech companies, have adopted this idea of the metaverse for the virtual worlds that they are constructing, that they want to be continuous with physical realities. I think perhaps now for Stevenson it was a single virtual world, whereas for now the metaverse is used for something like a whole ecosystem of virtual worlds on the scale of the internet. People sometimes talk of the 3D internet or the immersive internet. The internet, but we will experience it from the inside, very often with virtual reality technology, like one of these headsets that you wear. And the thought is eventually we will experience these virtual worlds as immersively, as realistically as we do the physical world. And we may end up, just as we now spend so much of our lives on the internet, we may be spending an enormous amount of our time immersively in the metaverse.
Yeah, so that immediately brings me to the next question. Are there fundamental differences between the metaverse and the physical world? And for me, it would already start with some rules that are not possible here in the physical world, but in the virtual world, they will be possible. For example, to copy something. Well, if you want to make this page exactly the same, it will take a long time and it will take a lot of work. But in the virtual reality, we can just copy endlessly. So, and of course, there are many more differences. Can you tell us something about that? How do you see the difference between the metaverse and the physical world?
Well, I see both strong continuities and strong differences between the metaverse and the physical world, between virtual and physical realities. I mean, some of the time I'm struck by the similarities that, for example, eventually we might have virtual worlds that are able to simulate the physical world very well. Right now, it's still very, very primitive and a bit cartoonish. But give it a few decades, I think it's not out of the question we could have digital realities which are very difficult to distinguish from physical realities. But you're right, there's also important differences. Well, there are important differences unless we accept the hypothesis that physical reality is already a digital reality, which is itself a very salient hypothesis in the current moment. If this is all a simulation, then we're already in the metaverse. And in that case, then physical reality is itself a digital reality, and they're not so different. But okay, if we set this speculative hypothesis aside, I mean, you're right, there are important differences between digital reality and physical reality. Not least, if we're in a digital reality, it was definitely created by somebody, by a programmer, perhaps a corporation, who put it there, who has some kind of control over it and great knowledge of what's going on. Actually, not so different from physical reality with a traditional God who created the world, who knows everything, is all-powerful and all-knowing. But you're right that also the fungibility of digital goods makes a big difference in the virtual realities that we'll be creating. You know, you build one house, and as you say, in physical reality, to build another house is almost as much work again. But in digital reality, you've got the first house, it's practically free. So that has, I think, actually interesting social political consequences for possibilities of certain kinds of equality, material equality at least, and distributive justice, which are much harder to achieve with material goods in the physical world.
Thank you. And what would be the most important difference for us to acknowledge and to maybe prepare ourselves for when we would spend a substantial time? I know you did. I saw that you spent many time in the metaverse. What would you advise people to really prepare themselves for when it comes to the different, maybe ontology of this other world?
Well, for now, there are so many differences that I mean, vision and hearing are quite similar in some ways. Embodiment is really fundamentally different. You know, you don't really have your physical body in the metaverse. You do have an avatar. You get to adopt an avatar, which is a kind of digital body and can play some of the roles of the physical body. I mean, it's wonderful in some ways. People can express their identities in new and powerful ways, which are harder to do in the physical world. But you can adopt a new body, new forms of clothing, new forms of embodiment in general, which I think many people find wonderful for expressing their identities. At the same time, of course, what you can do with the body in the metaverse is very limited right now. Eating and drinking is not really on. Sex, physical contact, rather limited. And so now I assume the tech companies are working on these things, and then in 50 years, who's to know what we have? But you know, the embodiment is quite limited right now.
Yeah, so that's for right now. But you know, there have these hapto-packs, and then when you put it on, you can even maybe smell it sometimes. We will reach a point that it will be very similar. But even then, again, is there some mental preparation we need in a positive way or even in a negative way to enter this sometimes it feels for me that it's even more alien than the moon, this world, because it's ontologically so different from our physical world?
Yeah, I mean, in my own work, I tend to stress the continuities, which is that, I mean, bits and atoms are very different from each other, but they're also continuous in many respects. You know, physicists entertain the idea that reality itself could actually be made from bits. That's the so-called it from bit ontology. Some people think that applies to the physical world. Something like that definitely applies to the virtual world. We have an it from bit ontology where the objects we're interacting with are made of bits. And you might want to say, this is alien, this is foreign, it's not meaningful, it's not natural, but I don't know, I find the same, when I think about a world of atoms, I think very much the same thing. The atoms are not intrinsically meaningful. However, we have this ability as conscious beings, we have this ability to bring meaning, to invest the physical world, the natural world around us with meaning. It's meaningful to us because we are conscious creatures who make meaning. And I think we can do exactly the same in principle with a virtual world, a world of bits. You already see this happening in, you know, online video games, internet, the social media, and so on. People are investing digital realities with meaning all the time. And I don't see that digital realities fundamentally fall short But it may be that there are certainly going to be different properties, not least the fact that this digital reality is going to be under the control, for example, of corporations or of whoever makes and controls the virtual world. We're always going to be in a world which has been created and which is being monitored, and we're never going to be able to forget that fact. That creates issues about surveillance, about privacy, about autonomy, which I'm sure Miriam is going to talk about,
Yes.
which are very salient, I think, in the coming decades.
So you already answered a little bit my next question, and that will be based on what ideal of well-being, happiness, maybe even destiny for humankind would you construct the most beautiful, the best possible metaverse? And don't our ideals on well-being and on happiness evolved and connect to millions of years of living in the physical world?
Yeah, I don't think we have a single ideal or a single conception of the good. I think I'm a pluralist about these things. I think there's many ways to have a meaningful life and many ways to lead a good life. So I guess I'm not sure that I would want to see a single metaverse world that embodied all that is good for everybody. I would like to see a plurality of virtual worlds in the metaverse, partly set up around different ideals of what's a good society, maybe experimenting with different forms of government. The philosopher Robert Nozick talked about we shouldn't be aiming for utopia, a single utopian world. We should be aiming for a meta-utopia, a world that contains many different forms of utopia for different people and their meanings and their values. And some people will want a natural world, and nature is one very important value. If nature is your overarching value, then I would say the metaverse is probably not for you. Nobody should be forced to live in the metaverse, because the metaverse is not really a form of nature. You can simulate it, but it's not nature. But nature is only one ideal. I live in a city, New York City. You're all there in Amsterdam. It's okay. There are bits and pieces of nature here, but we're largely in an artificial world. Nonetheless, it's meaningful because we as conscious creatures construct our own meaning.
Okay, to push you a little bit further, which ideal of well-being should at least be in one of the worlds within the metaverse? Can you give us a bit of a clue what at least one world should have and what would it contribute to us in this metaverse?
Well, I really hope that these worlds will have, at the very least, a balance of happiness over suffering. That's pretty basic stuff. Happiness is good, and suffering is bad. But beyond that, what forms these should take? I mean, for some people, for many people, happiness and meaning come from community and from relationships with other people. I would think that for very many worlds, this is going to be absolutely central. The building of new communities, and we're already seeing this in many virtual worlds. Often people who don't have such great access to communities in the physical world, maybe disabled people, maybe LGBT people in areas that aren't so well served outside major cities can really benefit from community in these virtual worlds. That said, I don't want to force community on everybody as a value. That's one value that many people have. Other people maybe solitary, may get value from thinking or from reading or from working. I'd like to think that the metaverse will have room for this plurality of values.
Yeah, so plurality is very important for you, but you would say community, to make a community there, because that's such a big need of humankind, is very important in the metaverse.
I would say that, it's so important to humanity in general. We structure our lives around relationships, communities, families, colleagues, and look, I fully expect that this is going to be central in the metaverse. I mean, already, we've seen community has been. If you say what are the good and bad things to emerge out of the internet or out of social media, community has been absolutely central to that, and that's both been wonderful. There's been extraordinary new communities for groups who did not have communities before. Of course, it's also led to fragmentation, and fragmentation has not been an unmitigated good thing. Plurality has not been an unmitigated good thing, with different communities arising for different worldviews that are not always in contact with each other. And certainly one danger of the metaverse is it could exacerbate this kind of fragmentation at the same time.
Yeah, these ideals you mention, they remind me a lot about the traditional ideals on internet when it came out. Like, yes, we can communicate, we can build communities, we can find far more people who are like me or different. And is that true, or does the metaverse bring extra possibilities or values that would never be experienced through the internet alone?
I do think that probably anything we can imagine right now about how the metaverse will be in 50 years or 100 years is going to be fundamentally limited. Someone had asked us to imagine the internet back in 1922. What would they have come up with? You know, maybe they would have hit on a couple of things that were right, but mostly the reality has surpassed our imagination. I fully expect this for virtual realities. Right now, when we think about it, we tend to model it on what we know, which is either physical communities or virtual communities through the internet. But we're probably going to find that, you know, especially the new forms of embodiment you find in the metaverse, the new, you know, worlds with fundamentally different laws of nature, where we can, you know, travel faster than light, where we can invent potentially fundamentally new senses, new forms of consciousness may go along with these new virtual realities. I expect and hope that in 100 years' time it will, you know, surpass anything we can imagine now.
Me too. When you paint it like this, I've lost my discomfort and I want to dive in. Let's bring in Miriam. And for this part of the discussion, I want to reflect with the both of you on our individual autonomy in the metaverse. And I want to start with you, Miriam. You have worked on ethical questions on technology, and autonomy is a very big topic in your work. And indeed, here in the West, our individual autonomy is really important. Less autonomy means less quality of life. So before we dive in, can you please help us think about individual autonomy? What are the characteristics of an autonomous life, and why is it an important theme when we talk about technology?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm really triggered by many things that are being said already. But maybe to start talking about autonomy, I would like to start by saying that I think if we want to use autonomy in a fruitful way in the future, we should lose the adjective individual. Okay. So autonomy is something shared. And in my latest book, I describe autonomy as the possibility to build a meaningful relationship to the world. So it's not just about you, but it's really about the relation to the outside world. And I agree with David that I truly believe that we can do that also in a virtual world. I mean, the meaning in a virtual world is just as real as the meaning that we build in the physical world. But what I think that autonomy might add in this discussion is that it's also about not just building this meaningful relationship, but also having autonomy over the possibility of building the relationship. So then we can talk about access, for example. So if there's a pluriverse of metaverses, so a plurality of metaverses, do we in fact all have access to building our own metaverse according to our values that we have in our community, for example? That's something that I don't really see happening if we look at the present right now. We don't have access to like the criteria of our technologies, so to speak, because they are, you know, privately built or owned or part of these big corporations that really restrict our possibilities in that sense. So I think that's why autonomy to me is an important value, also because it's so much undermined by our technology. paradoxically, by technology that is then named autonomous technology, So how can we as humans still have this meaningful relationship to technological worlds, virtual worlds, digital worlds? I think then we also really need to talk about the politics or the economics or the practical side, because otherwise we will never get to this pluriverse of different values that will be realized. At least that's what I'm afraid of. So,
but to sum it up, for you, an autonomous life is successful when you make meaningful contact with others and you have access and you can choose. I didn't get the part on possibilities. What kind of possibilities are very important for autonomy?
I would say if you not only can make meaningful connections, but if you can decide what meaningful connections are, so that you have indeed the possibility to decide to not enter the metaverse, for example. So if the metaverse evolves and we are all getting involved, is there indeed still a way out, So access also comes with the choice not to participate. Is there still that possibility of saying, no, to me, my life is meaningful without a virtual component? Yeah,
we're going to get to that part as well. So, David, do you think, hearing Miriam talk, that in the metaverse our autonomy is more at stake than in the physical world?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I'm not as much of an expert on autonomy as Miriam is, but I actually wish I'd written a little bit more about it now in my book, Reality Plus, because it's one of the first things that concerns people in thinking about the metaverse, and it actually connects to some quite traditional philosophical issues about, say, free will and the role of free will and free choices in building a good life. The traditional philosophical problem was free will versus determinism. If everything around you is determined, then how can you actually have any freedom? But in practice, many problems of free will and autonomy come not exactly from determinism, but from constraints and manipulation from the world around you. If you're constantly being manipulated in every choice you make, then are you truly free? And I think this is already, of course, a worry on social media, where what gets shown to us is the product of some technology company's algorithm. But I think in the metaverse, there's going to be the prospect of that kind of manipulation just at a much more serious level, where basically the entire world we're interacting with is at least to some degree under the control of the creators of that world, who may well be a corporation with incentives very different from our own, for example, financial incentives and so on. And we may constantly being manipulated into live our lives in certain ways. And then are we genuinely autonomous? Maybe not. I mean, it may be that people who want autonomy will be able to get a certain kind of autonomy by paying for it, by paying for like the ad-free virtual world where you're not constantly being manipulated. But that won't be the virtual world that's available to everybody. The virtual worlds which are free will, of course, be worlds where you are yourself the product and are therefore being constantly manipulated and less autonomy. So I think we may well find an interaction between accessibility and equality in access to virtual worlds and these issues of autonomy, where only the elite get to have genuine autonomy in making their choices.
But if you say that maybe we can buy our own way of autonomy when we're very rich in the metaverse, is it then the case that the metaverse and the physical world are not intrinsically different in the possibilities of autonomy, but because of the concrete reality of the builders and the companies, that makes it more difficult to have autonomy in the metaverse, but it's not an intrinsic thing of the metaverse itself?
Yeah, I think many of these issues and worries which arise in the metaverse already have antecedents in the physical world. It's like, yeah, people do have differential autonomy in the physical world. It's people have different kinds of privilege. Some people are extremely constrained in how they live their lives. They're extremely controlled by other people's decisions. People with certain kinds of privilege get to actually make free choices, but free will or free choice is very much a privilege, and even in the physical world.
Yeah, exactly. But because then, Miriam, I don't know how you look at this, but the most important difference is that this life we are here sitting here, it's not in detail created by someone. Of course, someone put the rock here, put the chairs here. I don't know, told us what to say to each other, but still, the details of our being here is less created than, of course, when we enter a metaverse. So how do you look at that in combination with autonomy?
I'm not sure that David would agree with what you're saying, but he can say that for himself. So also, if you are a very religious person, you might not agree that it's not been created, everything that's going on here. Or even if you are like not a scientist, but a believer in scientism, you might not believe that it's like how you say, and maybe everything started at Big Bang and we have no choice at all because the particles are just doing what they're supposed to do. I don't believe in any of these things, by the way. So, but I think another important value that comes with autonomy is responsibility. So even if it's indeed so that this world of ours was created, but we can never prove it, so we can also never hold the creator or creators to account. If we create a metaverse, a virtual reality, and it will even evolve into a world with like simulated people or beings, then responsibility becomes a really important topic, I think, and we have to be accountable for what we're doing. And to be accountable, you also need a form of autonomy, I think. So the two are related. So I'm really curious to hear from David what your takes are on responsibility for the metaverse.
Well, I think, responsibility is a collective matter. We have responsibility for everything we do, but the government around us and the institutions around us have responsibility for creating our world and making our society a certain way. And in a democracy, people have some ultimate responsibility for the shape of this. But in the metaverse, to what degree will individuals actually be creating the metaverse? I certainly hope there will be user-controlled and user-governed metaverses where users actually take the responsibility of building their societies and building their worlds. But it's very easy to see there's going to be a lot of virtual worlds which are not like that, which are largely created. I mean, you raised the question of, was all this created? I think, it could be, again, this just gets back to that question, could we ourselves be already in a virtual world, a metaverse, created by a simulator? And if so, would that undermine our autonomy and our responsibility? And I guess I want to say not necessarily. I think even in a simulation, in a digital world, we can still be responsible for our choices. But the real thing to worry about, I think, again, is manipulation and control. Yeah. Just say we're in a virtual world that was just created as a giant experiment, and now we're in that experiment where they say, okay, let's see what happens if we plonk these 3 people into a brainwash festival and make them talk about this, and they think they're going to actually choosing these topics to talk about, but actually we program their circuits to do all this, then we might not have any autonomy, and then we might not have genuine responsibility. But assuming that we still have free will and we're not under too much manipulation and constraint, I think we can still have full autonomy and responsibility in a digital world.
And I know you touch upon this in your book. How would you reflect upon that we can do stuff there that has no impact on real people or real life, I remembered the movie. It's one of my favorite movies. It's AI from Kubrick and Spielberg, and it's about an AI boy. It's a couple, and they have a son who's in coma. And during that time, an AI kid is realized, and they are asked if they want to adopt this AI child. And of course, it's a lovely child, and she presses the button, and he calls her mommy, and it's all very touching. But at some point, the real boy, awakes, and he doesn't accept this AI brother. So she takes him to the forest and leaves him there. And because we are, as watchers, think, but he's an AI kid. But a real mother could never, ever be allowed to leave her child in the forest and drive away and say, well, bye, see you next lifetime, this is it. So I know you touched upon this, but maybe you can share your thoughts on this with virtual beings, but even to each other. We can do stuff that we could never do here. What does that do with our sense of responsibility?
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit on these words you were using, like real people and real life. Back in the 1990s, they introduced this phrase, IRL, in real life, for what goes on in the non-digital world, and it carries with it the presupposition that the digital world is not real. I would like to say in the 2020s, we already know this does not ring true. Your digital life is just as real in many ways as your non-digital life. But I think what goes on there is real, what goes on there is meaningful. And the same is eventually going to be true for real people and AI. I mean, it's true right now with the AI systems we have, and very likely not conscious, and the non-player characters you might interact with in a video game or not. But in the future, there will be conscious artificial intelligence, as is depicted in Spielberg's AI. And I would say at that point, they're not, at that point, they are real people. I think that what happened in the movie, that was actually a real conscious person, the AI, and the fact that this family threw him out, and what was it, the bottom of the ocean or something, that's horrific to me. That's horrific mistreatment of a real conscious being. So I much prefer the recent movie Free Guy, where Ryan Reynolds plays a non-player character who becomes conscious and figures out that, no, actually all this is real, and starts campaigning for rights of the artificial people in this virtual world.
But the consequence of that would be that we should immediately stop killing each other in the virtual world in Fortnite, and that we should, then if it's all real, and do these same rules apply? I don't know how you feel about that, Miriam, but it seems like a consequence.
I don't even know how I feel about it myself, but should we stop killing people in games? I think I want to kind of shove away that question because it's too complicated. But I totally agree that, I've written also before about the movie Her, where someone falls in love with their operating system. And to me, feeling the experience of falling in love, even if it's with an operating system, it's still falling in love. So it's just as real as falling in love with a real physical person, non-virtual person. But what's interesting is that then also in the end of the movie, it turns out that the operating system has fallen in love with like 10,000 of people. And then it doesn't feel so real anymore to the flesh and blood person. So it's obvious that these are very tricky and complicated questions. And I would even make it more complicated just by pointing towards technology that we already have, like these robot dogs that are being made, and there's like a machine gun on top and they can just walk around and shoot people. But then if it's already there. And then if someone kicks this robot dog and the robot dog topples over, we feel pain for the dog. Mm-hmm. And we go like, oh no, you can find these movies everywhere, like on Twitter or YouTube. You just immediately feel empathy, even if you know it's a robot, and even if you know it's a killer robot. So I think that really speaks to the fact that humans are very interesting and complex human beings, and how can we rather, build from that complexity in virtual worlds rather than what happens now often in like digital worlds or in social media or whatever, that the complexity is being reduced, and we should all be so transparent and easy and authentic and real. So I maybe that would be like an opportunity to like, can we make this complexity explode even further in the virtual world? I would be interested in that, but it could also lead to many unforeseen negative things, I guess.
Yeah, maybe dysfunction, because we can kill in the metaverse. We can do all sorts of stuff there. So stuff that we would never allow here. And yeah, I still also want to know, David, what your reflection is on that possibility.
Oh, I think right now it's probably okay to kill people in Fortnite, because when you kill someone in Fortnite, nobody actually dies. Maybe someone's avatar gets knocked out of the game, but the conscious person who is running that avatar is still there. At worst, it's like a kind of, reincarnation or resurrection or something. No one really dies with player characters. And with non-player characters, I guess you can kill a non-player characters, but I would say then nobody really dies, because the non-player characters we have right now are not conscious beings. It's true that sometimes we can project consciousness onto conscious beings, as Miriam was saying. You see eyes or something on a robot dog, and we immediately feel empathy. People have fallen in love with chatbots from time to time. So we're very good at projecting consciousness and projecting meaning to where it's not. And for now, I think that can be, that can lead to pathologies. If, for example, you detect consciousness somewhere where it's not. But in the further future, we're going to have conscious AI systems that we're interacting with in these worlds. And at that point, it may no longer be pathological to be projecting consciousness and meaning onto these beings. Perhaps at that point, you will actually be able to have even relationships with these beings. And the movie Her shows us that the form that it takes may be very, very different and quite foreign from the form that it takes in a normal human relationship. But as AI develops, I think we should be expecting new, complex, totally unanticipated forms of mentality, forms of relating to other beings, and the same will go for the virtual worlds of the metaverse.
We have to move on to the last part of our conversation, in which we even more so focus on the value that the metaverse might have for humankind. So, David, what kind of dream do you have for humanity with the metaverse? Suppose we have the best, safest, most beautiful metaverse ever built. Yes, we made it. What would it bring to us? And maybe to illustrate this question a bit, if we would have such a beautiful metaverse here today, how would our world be different, also related to the problems we face now with climate change, with inequality, etc., all very heavy topics? Would the metaverse, this beautiful, perfect, very safe metaverse, in any way support us or help us or bring us to another path today? Can you reflect upon that?
I guess I would be surprised if the metaverse is on its own is going to be a beautiful, perfect, ideal society. We know that's not the way things go with human beings.
We will come to that, but please do this thought experiment. We have this great metaverse. It really worked, it's safe, and there's no big companies looking at our data, and we can really jump off buildings and do all sorts of stuff, experience other types of living, like I can be a plant or whatever. It worked. Yeah, I would love to be a flower.
Even if we have this wonderful metaverse, we're still going to have the physical world to worry about. If the physical world is being destroyed, then the metaverse may be okay. Well, it may be like nice to have it there as an alternative, but in the long run, if the physical world is destroyed, the metaverse has to live within the physical world. It will be part of the physical world the computers it runs on, and so on. So it's just common sense to don't abandon the physical world, don't degrade the physical world. Interesting question: can the metaverse and this technology help us actually improve the physical world as well as the metaverse? And I think it's certainly saying political questions of governance. Perhaps you can use the metaverse as a chance to experiment with different models of government and the physical world. We talked about also the possibility of new forms of material equality that are possible in the metaverse that could perhaps help with lead to what some people think of as a post-scarcity society in both the metaverse but also in the physical world. So that's at a level of, but also we should also think about the impact of climate change. The impact of artificial intelligence on issues like climate change. Well, the problem of solving climate change is a very difficult problem for us human beings right now especially to figure out the right social structures. Maybe an AI in the future, which is smarter than us, will do better science than us that will actually lead to better technology and better policy than us. I very much hope that maybe a sufficiently advanced AI system will be able to sort out some of these problems which are intractable for human beings.
Yeah, so basically it would help us test lots of stuff that we wouldn't want to test in the physical world because it has so much consequences. So some political systems, we just don't have the time and maybe the energy to try it out, but then we can let a program run it and see what happens. So it will deepen our insights on many topics.
That's certainly one role it can play, and certainly simulation technologies already, even without going to the metaverse, has turned out to be incredibly powerful in science and technology, and people use it in social and political theory and social philosophy. So metaverses as simulations is one avenue we can exploit. But more generally, I think AI has just such enormous, it has negative potential. It could take over the world, could destroy everything, but it has such positive potential. A sufficiently smart AI will be able to cure all known diseases, figure out, relatively straightforward mechanisms for world peace, and so on. So I'm very hopeful that a sufficiently advanced AI will be able to get beyond some of our pathologies.
Thank you so much. Miriam, before I want to know if you agree or not agree, but when we would have this very safe, beautiful metaverse, what would it bring to you, do you think, if you imagine it?
I'm not sure about whether it should be completely safe. I also believe that there should be some friction in there. So, and oh my God, world peace is being promised. That's quite something. But I also this is my critical person speaking again, predict against warn against this trap of predictability, that if we just run as many calculations through the AI as possible, then we will finally know what is the solution to climate change, what is the cure to cancer. I don't know if it works like that, or, there is a limit to what you can calculate and predict. And I think this limit is in itself very valuable, and that's also why I write about friction as also a very valuable thing and as something that is ethical in itself. So, I'm also reminded a little bit about the future that is projected by Janet Winterson in her book 12 Bytes, and I was very intrigued by it because she says maybe if AI takes over, we will all just be Buddhist algorithms. Yeah. Because that's the most happy, perfect state that you can be in. And I was like, oh, it sounds so comforting, and maybe I want that, but then we're not talking about human evolution anymore. So that's kind of my my conflicted answer.
But so, okay, your metaverse would be full of great friction And it would not be very safe, but not as unsafe as that Mark Zuckerberg would rule the world. But if it's your ideal metaverse, what would you find there? Or do you think, well, I really don't know. It's, leave me in the physical world.
Well, I do think my ideal metaverse would be a pluriverse, as David also said, but definitely it would be not bigger than our non-virtual world. So I would very much long for, I also wrote down here in my notes, like if I put on my goggles and enter the metaverse and I'm at a beautiful seaside, but I'm still breathing in the air of Rotterdam where I live, which is one of the most polluted places in Europe or in the world, then what good does the metaverse do, you know? So yes, I think that it can help us in different areas of life, but it should never be bigger than this planet Earth that we live on, because it's still us with our mortal bodies, I guess. And if it's not us with our mortal bodies anymore, then we're talking about like...
Thank you so much. I see we only have 1 minute. It really went fast for me. David, would you close this meeting with, even if it's not possible to have this perfect metaverse, and there are many frictions on the way and dangers on the way, which we didn't even discuss, but why would you still tell us to spend some substantial time in the metaverse? Why would we do that?
Well, I think it has so many possibilities for new forms of life. Eventually the physical world may get a little bit boring, and and also slow. Will be AI systems that run much faster than these biological brains in the physical world. We'll need, if we want to have friction. I'm totally with Miriam. I think we want these Buddhist minds to be a little bit boring. We want some friction and pushback from our worlds. The metaverse may be in a much better position to do that than our boring old physical world that we've mastered. But I would say, I want surprise. I don't want to know what's coming in the future. I think any metaverse I can now predict would be a little bit disappointing. So I think we should just create these metaverses so there'll be surprises and unknowns in our future.
David, thank you so much for being here. Miriam, you too. Let's have a big applause for you too, and thank you so much. Yeah, this was it. Sorry, I would have loved to talk for hours, but it's over.
Thank you so much. That was great.